I therefore propose that our inadequate efforts in this area be supplemented by a Peace Corps of talented young men and women willing and able to serve their country in this fashion for 3 years. I'm convinced that our men and women dedicated to freedom are able to be missionaries not only for freedom and peace, but join in a worldwide struggle against poverty and disease and ignorance. All who in the midst of their work wish to serve their country in freedom should be given an opportunity and an agency in which their talents could serve our country around the globe.
I'd gone back to Chicago when the phone rang. It was the president on there, and he called a couple of times, and finally my wife said, "Sarge, you've got to talk to Jack now. Remember, he's the president." And so I said, well, all right, I will. So about the third time I got on the phone, he said, listen, you've got to come down here to Washington to run the Peace Corps. And I said, well, Mr. President, you know, I don't know anything about any Peace Corps. And he said, well, that's all right, neither does anybody else. And I said, but yes, but remember all the political debts you incurred during the campaign. Why don't you give this job to one of your political friends? He said, listen, Sarge, the truth of the matter is that everybody thinks the Peace Corps is going to be one of the greatest fiascos in history. It turns out that way. It's much easier to fire a relative than a political friend.
But hardened Washington insiders mocked the idea as Kennedy's children's crusade.
They thought this was a naive kiddie corps.
If you want to take a trip of the moon, send the Peace Corps up there.
I mean, these are hard-bitten politicians who have tough campaigns and who trade and wheedle and negotiate.
And it might be a very good place to try out this experiment, sort of a juvenile experiment.
The ridicule unnerved Kennedy. He wrote, "It is very possible that it is a mistake that men and women as young as the immediate post-college age should be sent abroad."
In Kennedy's mind was the notion of, you know, a couple of hundred young people might go out and do these things in the developing countries. I think Shriver had a much bolder, grander vision that to really make an impact, you had to scale this thing up.
Because hunger and ignorance and disease exist in stark reality for billions of people.
I have today signed an executive order providing for the establishment of a Peace Corps on a temporary pilot basis. I'm also sending to Congress a message proposing authorization of a permanent Peace Corps. This Corps will be a pool of trained men and women sent overseas by the United States government or through private institutions and organizations to help foreign countries meet their urgent needs for skilled manpower. It is our hope to have between 500 to 1,000 people in the field by the end of this year. We will send Americans abroad who are qualified to do a job. We will send those abroad who are committed to the concept which motivates the Peace Corps.
To those people in the huts and villages of half the globe struggling to break the bonds of mass misery, we pledge our best efforts to help them help themselves.
To Rutgers University in New Jersey come the vanguard of the U.S. Peace Corps to begin their training for President Kennedy's unique program of helping underdeveloped countries through example and comradeship as well as material aid. They take physical exams as tough as the written ones, for there may be few doctors and dentists in the remote parts of Colombia and Ghana and Tanganyika where the first units are to be sent from this and other universities. Youth Corps Director H. Sergeant Shriver addresses the 81 candidates of this pioneer group as they begin their rugged course of 50 hours a week for the next 8 weeks. He tells them that their organization may be the last chance the United States has to show that we are really and truly qualified to be the leaders of the free world.
After initial selection, Peace Corps volunteers get from 2 to 3 months of intensive training in this country before they're finally assigned overseas. They get training in the language and in the law of the country to which they'll go, and an understanding of its culture and its customs, and a sharpening up of their own skills. They get in the best possible physical shape for their new way of life, which usually is more rigorous and more demanding than that they've been used to. Some of the most valuable and skilled people in the Peace Corps have never even been to college. Others have been out of college for several years. The Peace Corps College training program makes each one richer in knowledge and better able to give to others. Here at Rutgers University, a group of volunteers scheduled to work in agriculture and community development in Colombia, South America, are learning the language of that host country.
At Rutgers University in July of 1961, they got a 4-week course preparing them to work in Colombia. Some of them were flabby, and they got sent out to the athletic field part of every day to use whatever muscles they had. And they learned some Spanish. Every corpsman must have some facility in the local language, or he might as well stay home. And some classroom work in the country's history and culture.
And then to work. This is Colombia, South America. Here, Peace Corps volunteers work as members of community development teams, living and working in small rural villages, drilling wells and laying water and sewer pipes, organizing and working with youth clubs, tackling agricultural and health problems, and many others too. Here, for example, volunteers are examining young coffee trees and working with Colombian farmers on the coffee plantations. This is a machine designed for making building blocks out of materials which are available locally. Nutrition and home economics instruction is given to the women of the villages, and health and sanitation instructions too. In Colombia, Peace Corps volunteers work side by side with their Colombian co-workers.
The work they are doing is the story of the Peace Corps, Dave. In Colombia, one volunteer has developed a new method of construction using local bamboo. His inventiveness helped open a new industry for the region where he is working.
I'm making 1/5 of what I made the first week after college. I certainly feel that the education that I'm receiving here, working in rural Colombia with the Peace Corps, would cause me to do the very same thing over again.
The willingness of all Americans, men and women, young and old, to serve in the Peace Corps, to serve in all parts of the world, to serve at little pay, to do jobs that most of them have never done before, is one of the most encouraging manifestations of the American spirit that this country has seen in many years. The Peace Corps gives us a chance to show a side of our country which is too often submerged. Our desire to live in peace, our desire to be of help. I hope in the coming months and years that many of you will follow the example of those who've gone before. They, I think, are serving this country well. And in a very real sense, they are serving a larger cause, the cause of freedom and the cause of a peaceful world. They are demonstrating their interest in people who may live on the other side of the globe, who may live in poverty and misery, but who, because of the presence of the Peace Corps, live in hope. I hope this spirit will grow, and that hundreds of others of young Americans and older Americans will go overseas to show our best side, to show how much we desire to live at peace. There can be no greater service to our country, and no source of pride more real than to be a member of the Peace Corps of the United States. I hope that you will join.
He and Shriver talked about growing the Peace Corps to 100,000 volunteers within the next decade. And when we do, Kennedy said, there will be 1 million Americans with the experience of living in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And for the first time, we'll have the constituency for a good foreign policy.